Yajong and welcome back to Season 2 of the Let's Talk About Autism in Hmong podcast. This is your host, Tia Yang Lee. I am a board-certified behavior analyst, and if you tuned in last season, you'll know we kicked off the podcast with our pilot episode about autism and K-dramas. I then took you through a winding journey between the experiences of Hmong families and Hmong professionals. I wonder which one was your favorite, which ones resonated with you most, and which one did you feel like you learned the most from? Also, which one did you feel like, wow, I never even knew about that before? I'd love to hear your feedback and suggestions for a possible Season 3. So hold on tight because Season 2 is going to be even more jam-packed with information and stories from Hmong individuals, family members, and professionals who are so amazing in helping me to continue to normalize the conversation about autism in Hmonglish. Welcome back. I knew I wanted to open up Season 2 with a big bang and answer the much asked question of what is autism in Hmong? I needed the voice and the expertise of a diagnosing clinician who sends the referrals on over to me so that I can then do my part in the autism service provider lineup. I'm so humbled and grateful to have Dr. Alyssa Kaying Vang from the Twin Cities join me on this episode. I had hoped she would share her insights on autism and mental health, given her vast background and understanding of the Hmong culture. But what I didn't expect was to have even more questions now that the recording is over. Listen on and share with me your feedback on my thought-provoking chat with Dr. Vang. Hello and welcome to, I can't believe I'm saying this, but Season 2 of the Let's Talk About Autism in Hmonglish podcast. I am so excited to even be able to say that. I wasn't sure if it was going to happen because after Season 1, I thought, I feel like I covered most of the things, but then I had a lot of listeners send in suggestions and I thought, can we tackle those topics? Are we ready for that? And the more I got to talking with those listeners, I realized, yes, we have to tackle these topics, And so as I was designing Season 2, my husband, he's kind of my marketing person. He's been helping me just to get a grasp on the Hmong approach to mental health, to autism, and who already is out there in this arena, not just the mental health arena, but the Hmong mental health arena. And he said, have you heard of Dr. Alyssa Vang? And I said, I feel like I have. I've seen, on social media, but I don't know her. He said, well, here's her email. And I thought, I can't just email her. He's like, you never know. Worst case scenario, she doesn't ever reply. And I thought, okay, that is true. As a new business owner, as a entrepreneur, as a person new to this, I was like, you know what? If they don't reply, it's okay. We'll figure something out. And so I did. And it was just a general email address. And imagine my shock when I got a reply from the Dr. Alyssa Vang. And I thought, oh, it's not just a bot. Okay, it's a person. So, you guys, I'm so humbled and honored today to welcome to my little podcast, Dr. Alyssa Kaying Vang. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you so much, Tia, for having me on. And I just get so inspired by younger Hmong Americans, especially younger Hmong American women who are doing their thing, especially doing their thing in the mental health field. And so thank you for reaching out. And if, I see the email, I always respond back because I'm always so excited when I hear about individuals like yourself who's doing great work in your respective areas. So glad to be here today.
Thank you. And, I was looking for your bio and it said you've been in the field for 20 years. And so could you share with me and my listeners, I guess, what brought you to the field of clinical psychology and go, so this is Hmonglish, so please feel free anytime to interject English. Did being a Hmong woman kind of influence your decision to go into clinical psychology and how you could help the Hmong community?
Yeah, I'm gonna date myself a little bit here, but, back in the days when we were going through high school, the goal at that time, the messaging that was sent down from our elders, our parents,
Mhm.
our aunts and uncles were get married after, a certain age because you're
Mhm.
gonna be an old maid. And
Yes.
then the other messaging was, if you're gonna go to school, study something that's more practical.
Oh, yes.
And so I listened to one of them. I didn't get married, so I didn't listen to that, but I thought that I would go to school for business.
Mhm.
And, you know, the I don't have to get into the details of that, but certainly my father, really felt that that would be a challenge because "Bây giờ Hmong thì bây chỉ muốn cho bằng sự, thì
Mhm.
要有個 business, 也要獨立，也要有你也要睇你學邊度有個 business." But I went into that field anyway. But during college, I sort of found myself, and I think that's what's cool about college is that it allows you to explore without the confines of your Hmong parameters.
Yes.
And so I was able to take different courses. And through that, I discovered that I didn't enjoy the business and the accounting classes so much, but I enjoyed more so the social science classes, especially psychology and the study of
Mhm.
human behaviors and psychopathology and all of that. And then it just really led me to reflect on my own life. And all along, I had always had a keen interest in human behaviors
Yes.
but not always cognizant of it. And college was where the pieces just kind of fell into place and psychology courses were just easy and fun
Yeah.
and why go into a field that's hard and not fun, right? And so that's
Right.
how I stumbled into this field and then further down the road I realized, oh, I was exposed to it early on as an interpreter for my mom.
Okay.
And again, these things don't reveal themselves to you as you're navigating life as a kid, as a teenager, as a young adult. But that's how I fell into psychology and I just loved it. And I knew that I wanted to do direct psychotherapy because I
Mhm.
enjoyed the listening piece of it. I'm much more of an introvert and I say less and I mean, right now I talk a lot more than most people, but at the beginning I had less to say and more to just listen and reflect. And I just fell into um this space where I knew I didn't want to be a researcher, I wanted to be a direct provider.
Yes.
And at a bachelor's level, you can't do therapy. You
Right.
just do a lot of case management, you do a lot of group homes, and at least that was what was available back then. So it just was the natural next step was to go to college and get a degree so that I could do what I had always felt I loved doing.
Yes. And so, wait, was that in California? Is that correct? Where you got
Yes,
your
yes. So I was out in California and did my undergrad there at the University of California in Santa Barbara, and then took a year or two off. I can't remember, and then went back to graduate school, got my master's and my doctorate in psychology and clinical psychology out in the Central Valley. And then was fortunate enough to get my internship here in the Twin Cities
Okay.
at Hennepin County Medical Center, or now known as Hennepin Healthcare. And, um, I think it's been quite a blessing to be here in the Twin Cities, to be able to provide support for the community here, not only the Hmong community, but the other BIPOC communities and immigrant and refugee communities, and also the
Yes.
dominant community as well too. So that's
Yes.
great.
That was my next question. Like, what brought you to the Twin Cities?
So the way that college or graduate school works for psychologists is very similar to medical
Okay.
schools, where there is your final year where you apply for an internship. So very similar to
Mhm.
residency, and you apply nationally. So you're not restricted to
Ah.
where you are. It's a national application process, and I knew in my heart that there was a lack of Hmong providers and I knew that there were many Hmong um, family members and community members who struggled with the mental health challenges related to perhaps the traumatic experiences of the Vietnam War, the
Mhm.
traumatic plight out of Laos, just the readjustment, the language barriers, and all of that. So I knew that mental health was a pretty significant but under served or maybe under identified
Right.
areas. And so that's what I wanted to do. And so I applied to places that I knew there were pockets of Hmong,
Okay.
and certainly I applied to places in California and then Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Denver, of all
Mhm.
places, because my sister lived in Denver at the time.
Mhm.
And I ended up here because it's always the meeting and the feel for the training program, meeting the people. And I knew that there was a large Hmong community here, but that wasn't the most important thing. It was, where do I fit in? Where can I get the best training? Because the training after that, you don't get any other training. You're just in a
Right.
hospital. So I've been very blessed. My journey has been a very blessed one.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing that. You've been in the field for many, many years, and you've worked with that pocket of Hmong families. Now, we are talking about autism. And so for me, as a BCBA at a master's level, I cannot diagnose. I can sit on a diagnostic team, right, and give my behavioral analytic contribution to the big conversation leading to the diagnosis. But for you, going on through the PhD level clinician there that could give a diagnosis, whether it's in your private practice or on a team. So, with that background, then can you tell me what is the overall sentiment from Hmong families who present with a child who is, or maybe on the autism spectrum? Because I don't know if you I think on your website you do cover the ADHD, autism, so maybe the Hmong family will refer to you by their pediatrician, and luckily in the Twin Cities they are directed to need to go to see a diagnosing practitioner, and your
Mhm,
name is on the roster. I'm like,
mhm.
oh, then they need a Hmong doctor that can help us. Let's talk about office. So, what is the general reception that you get from them when they show up? Is it any different than, our white counterparts or other BIPOC communities, or just tell me about that experience.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the phase or the stage in which the parents are in
Mm-hmm.
at the point of referral,
Yes.
because it's mixed. And just to clarify, our clinic no longer does testing
Okay.
for autism. And
Mm-hmm.
I know it's a full battery. You go through and you administer a lot of different tests, whether it's for assessing for cognitive functioning, academic functioning, or the ADOS, which is often used to diagnose individuals
Yes.
with autism. We have moved away from that just because the needs for direct therapy or psychotherapy are high. And so
Okay.
we don't do that at our clinic. But back in the days when I was still doing that and I was getting referrals, if I was getting parents who were identified, whose child was identified at an earlier stage, when
Right.
they came in, a lot of it is providing support for the parents. A lot of it is trying to listen to them and hear their concerns. And most of the time, their concerns are related to either physical health or
Okay.
academic functioning. And
Okay.
so là tốt sa chê là hay ta ô bé tum nhỏ nó chê nu yu lo chê nu lu lư chi bui bo chê nu chê li hay lu chi tàu chê nu chê li còn tàu là cỡ chi tông tàu chê này khu là rất chơi chê này khu là thế li sa bé tua,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
and so when they say that, then I spend a lot of time really trying to understand how they feel about this. And
Right.
oftentimes it is very hard for parents to
Okay.
accept that. But what makes it a lot easier is talking about and talking around how, how is talking around their concerns with the academic. right?
Okay.
Rồi bây giờ cần đợi知道嘢嗰隻抽嘢嗰條多嘢，俾佢知道上咗，俾佢知道成些些你錄屏時nhau嚟呀，所以你
Mhm.
嘅cần đợi nhau嚟呀，所以你不斷咗嘅cần đợi嚟呀，嘢俾麼你成大，嘢俾出發得多，嘢俾條你包係啲，你嘅斷咗嘢嚟呀，你嘅話你。nếu mua bình sự ya li ya ya bete li bao đó này kushala thia shi kong
Mhm.
chú ý hay tiệt yo che cái ba li ya đâu người ta che cần đau này thia li họ dầu chua chậm nhọn mà nó nhon ya li nữa. So I
Right.
find that that's easier for parents to be receptive of, and if I couch the conversation that way, then there's less focus on the stigma of it and
Okay.
more focus on supporting the child to get to where the parents would want them to be. Now, sometimes parents come in and they're not as invested because maybe they're still struggling with the shame, the guilt, the self blame, all of those emotions. Because
Mhm.
係第一個對面有對咗嘅，即係讓你要我你我自己到我臭。
Mhm.
有嘈你北工藥工，即係做姑
Mhm.
娘女人就應攞你咯，即係做姑
Yeah.
娘嘢頭烏姑娘你攞你咯，whatever it is，即係做姑娘要一嘢做curse or whatever, right? So they
Right.
always believe that there's something that we might have done
Yes.
to to result in this kind of challenge. And so I think some of them 都真係類似錯殺彈到嘢要來要姑娘冇嘢
Mhm.
要去殺。
Mhm.
If you can avoid it, you don't want to enter into those really difficult conversations. And so I often focus on what their concerns are, what the needs are, and what we can do to get them to that place. Now, there are some parents, when they come in, they're referred, they've already exhausted all the other areas that they're a little bit more open to. 即係做你都我
Right.
能我曳做，即係做你都冇冇知他冇 come out 做，即係做你都但係佢出嚟做 and I'm sort of the last resort. So when they come in, they might still be, struggling with some of the emotional things that they're going through, but they're ready to have a conversation about focusing on the child alone. So it's mixed sentiments. But I will say that the biggest challenge is that 被寂寞了的大. And so I will tell you that as a Hmong person, there are times when the autism diagnosis is missed
Mhm.
because the parents are more focused on language delays and cognitive delays. And
Yes.
so when they're more focused on that and there's not a lot of expectations from the child, we don't see the nuance behaviors that would suggest autism. We just see more of an intellectual impairment,
Right.
right? An
Right.
intellectual disability. So many of the kids that come through, we often end up diagnosing them with a intellectual disability
Okay.
and not autism.
Okay. So this is probably where I get into trouble, Dr. Alyssa, because probably because I'm so green that I'm still curious to ask the questions that maybe I should not ask. If we could go back to when you said, despite all of the Hmong beliefs that they carry in with them when they
Mhm,
arrive to you, but as a clinician, as a licensed clinician, you want to respect their boundaries and you want to be sure that you are just staying within the reins of what you do, but in your mind and in your heart, you're like, if they share it, right?
mhm,
Um, you said you don't address it, you kind of bypass it and get to the education part if that's where they're comfortable. So let's tackle that a little bit. Do you could you talk about that like with them? Maybe is there ever a place where there is a conversation to have about that and say, 只要吵 anybody or that this happened it because I am very scientific minded and I
mhm,
know I've seen the
mhm,
research. I live it out every day in practice. But it's so they hold on to it so firmly, so true. Like this is it because somebody highly knowledge, someone that
mhm,
I respect and I revere them because they are a leader in the Hmong customs. And I believe that. And then and then sometimes that can be a barrier to accepting other forms of support and services. And so how do we mitigate that? How do we
Yeah.
share a message that says, sure, that can be your belief, but on the other hand, we also have to, do we need to dispel those beliefs and say, I mean, it's such a generational thing. I think that with my generation, I'm all over the place because I have so many questions. When you have families come
Interesting
in,
topic. Yes.
when you have
Go
families
ahead.
come in, yes, and you don't have to give me a clear number, but like, is it like younger families, younger Hmong parents, older Hmong parents, a mix that you get the same sentiment from, or is it different based on their age group? Because I would say maybe Gina, they're less inclined to walk in with such a conviction of, oh,
Mhm. Mhm.
versus they might be less inclined to say that versus an older couple comes in and they're just like, nope, shaman said this is it, and but we like you said, you're our last resort, here we are. So tell me about
Right.
that. Like, can we address it? Can we have a
Mhm.
conversation about it? Like, is it,
Yeah.
how do, because I feel like we need to address it in order to move forward.
Right.
In order for me
Right.
to have this conversation in the Hmong community, I feel like we have to address it and say, you
Mhm.
guys, don't let that be a barrier. Like, still have your convictions, but also know that science can help.
Right. Right. Well, I think to answer your most recent question,
Yes.
it's we have a mix, and it's
Okay.
it's not in terms of their beliefs. It's not because of generations, it's not because of age, it's not because of acculturation. It's a mix. It's a mixed blend, and it's
Okay.
always hard to know at the first meeting until you dive into a deeper conversation.
Right.
Right? Because someone can be really young but still be very traditional in their
Mhm.
beliefs. Someone can be a Christian but
Mhm.
still have these beliefs at the heart of
Yes.
how they navigate life. And it's,
Yes.
in terms of spirituality being such a huge component of the way that we look at the world, the way that we navigate different health and healing approaches. It's just that bây chỉ mù hoàn năng là bây mù gõ xíu thọ và chữ đồ bây là but
Mhm.
bây quân chân là bây chuẩn tuần chút tụ bli yang jing a very powerful influence in the way that
Mhm.
in the way that we live our life, in the blessings that we receive, and in the health that we uh, have right currently, like
Yes.
how healthy we are. So I think it's hard to understand that, and I do think that even though there's certain generations, certain age groups that are a little bit more scientific based, that they still exist within systems that believe the spirituality piece of it and that believe in the Eastern psychology piece of it, right?
Yes.
So then to go back and touch on the other point that you made earlier, I think as a Hmong person, um, we think holistically because we exist within family and our cultural practices, and the way that we navigate life has always been more collective and holistic.
Yes.
And so I was doing holistic therapy even before I named it holistic therapy. And
Mhm.
so when a Hmong family comes in with a child who might have certain delays that are suggestive of autism, I treat them as a whole in that if I find that the conversation has gone in the direction of bảo vệ tiền lợi cho cái cha cô bảo vệ tiền là cô mua cái nhà là or thì do lòng là kiện chân li bé mỗi chuyện chân cho tụi mình nhỏ cái tuôn cho này cái I do address it, but
Mhm.
address it from a holistic perspective.
Okay.
Especially if they're not at a place where I have to support and provide psychoeducation on autism, I often say, "Oh, bé mong, bé cũng mua bé ya kiến chân thầu tụi mình nhỏ tuần cho lên nó là trở li nếu mà nhỏ gì nè, bé nè họ và bắt đầu một sai năng sai hay sai hay là cha bắt đầu một chia Hmong chua tên tờ Việt để bé Hmong gì bây giờ Hmong giờ bé thả bao tên nó ya thì
Mhm.
bé cô một cái cái chính giờ thì nè bắt đầu chia lìa cái ba rồi nè chả mình nhọ. And so it
Mhm.
kind of starts that way. And if they say, oh yeah, we tried this and this and this, and I would, it would pique my interest, and I would ask, well, what did the shaman say? What did the spiritual healer say? What have you done? Has it worked? Has it not worked? And usually in that course of conversation, I find that the parents, again, they've ended up in my office because those things may not have worked,
Right.
or they're wanting more support, or they're now
Yes.
open to more of a holistic approach.
Mhm.
And so I don't negate what they're doing. I do validate the holistic alternative approaches.
Yeah.
But if it doesn't work, then it gives me, um, an opportunity to provide information about what my service can do for their child,
Mhm.
how it can be helpful, how it's complementary from a holistic perspective to what they're doing, and how it's not, again, invalidating what they're doing. And so I find that most parents are very open to that because we're all on this life journey, and we all have very similar goals, which is we want healthy, thriving children.
Yes.
And if we can start there, I think anything is possible.
Yes, absolutely. This is why you're so good at what you do. I'm still trying to figure out, how do we encourage them to be brave and
Mm,
to even when they go to the table with all of these um I think all of these thought process that have been instilled and passed on, and that's all they know, but they also know that it didn't work, right? It didn't help whatever ritual that was performed, and so now they have to let their guard down and go, okay, now I have to go to and luckily they're like, oh, it's a Hmong person, there's a level of comfort there. I can imagine what it's like for the Hmong families who don't have that luxury to go to a Hmong clinician and have these conversations. So thank you for all that you've done to help the Hmong families, because it is a daunting journey, y'all,
mm,
to receive. Like you said, usually it is when the and then so at that point their child's like 5. So for 5 years they've kind of just accepted and just thought, oh, we'll just wait and see what schools tell us. And then it's a little bit of a shock, if nobody mentioned it to them for the word autism. And
mhm,
so that kind of segues into my next question, Dr. Alyssa. Autism. So many professionals reach out to me and families reach out because they want to understand so that they can help educate their family members.
mhm,
What is autism? Yeah,
mhm,
I've been promoting this episode going, we're going to talk about what is autism? What is autism? That's a big buzz question because I think we want to understand beyond La Luna. And people ask, are we going to recoin it? Are we going to give it a
mhm,
name? So they're in the Twin Cities. I think that the Somali community is big. And I've heard and seen that they kind of coined a term for autism. And I like it, that the way
mhm,
that they did it, it makes sense for me. But in the Hmong community, I don't know. As a clinician, I'm not sure that it's necessary for us because
mhm,
I think what we should focus on is figuring out as a collective, how do we describe it in a way? Because yeah, the parents are concerned about the physical attributes, or if there are any needs for like occupational therapy, right? Like the stemming or the tiptoe walking, or the academic perspective. But they fail to acknowledge that there's the cognitive or the behavioral components of it. And so, sure, we could come up with a term, but we still need to define Hmong very well what the characteristics are. Because you got the "Nichibono yuta," but that's also not true because it's a spectrum. There are
mhm.
some individuals with autism, like you yuta, right? So
Right,
it's so difficult to say this is what autism looks like because
right.
it's so different. The spectrum is so broad. There's you're very, you know, the Asperger side, like the very savant, and they can rattle off. They're the little professors, and then you have Doi, Yingzhi Hailu, it may engage in self injury. So it's very difficult to explain to a Muslim person this is autism. So can you shed some light on that with me and how you would explain that? Hello, listeners. If you are hearing this ad, thank you so very much for taking the time to give my little podcast some love and attention. I hope that you will share your favorite episodes with your family and friends, and that they also do the same. I know there are some Hmong families out there who don't know about this safe space I've created, where you can hear the stories of Hmong families and Hmong professionals talking about their experiences with autism. This podcast is produced by Thea Yali Consulting LLC. I am Thea, and I wanted to take a minute to invite you to check out another passion project of mine that was recently launched. I created an online course entitled The Lifespan of Parenting Your Child with Autism for any and all parents who have a child with a disability. The online course is spoken in Hmonglish with English subtitles so that all parents can access this information that I share about your 18-month-old all the way to old age. This course is designed to empower you to become your child's best advocate with me as your guide. As a bonus and special thank you for hearing this ad on the Let's Talk About Autism in Hmonglish podcast, DM me and I'll send you a 30% off coupon. Talk soon!
Yeah, and I think that's why diagnosing kids with autism, as I referenced earlier, is very challenging in the Hmong
Yes.
community.
Mm-hmm.
Because number one, parents are not attuned to some of these nuanced quirks, if I may call them,
Yes.
delays or challenges that would kind of, turn the light bulb for us as clinicians to say, okay, there you go. That's a
Mm-hmm.
trait of autism. In fact, I had a child that I worked with for a whole year before I thought, I think this child is autistic,
Mm-hmm.
because this child was on the higher end
Mm-hmm.
of the autistic, spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And parents, most Hmong parents are so busy with um, trying to be financially secure so that they can provide the basic needs for their family, that they're not always attuned to some of the nuances of sensory issues, the
Right.
nuances of food texture sensory or noise level sensory, or
Yes.
the behaviors of lining toys or repetitive behaviors. They just see that the
Mm-hmm.
你你只用你对老，你只用你对有，对老对有 this surpass 你了. They just
Mm-hmm.
know it in more of a global delay, right?
Right.
And that also speaks to Hmong. We have a very dichotomous mindset about strengths and deficits. It's either nu duola nu j,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's
Mm-hmm.
either nu momola nu jimomo,
Yep.
right? There's no spectrum, there's no in between,
Yes.
and so it gets really hard as clinicians to try to dig into those, because parents will say because they're not paying
Mm-hmm.
to it. But what I found is that even for parents who are very savvy, who come in and they already understand that their child has autism, for all of these reasons, right? For all the symptoms that I will say in a few minutes. But what I found with those parents is that they just use the word autism.
Yep.
我頭度都知道啦，係啲 autism 那嘢要因保你係得住，你因保要係得住呢，要住
Yama.
呢係得個對面有不斷咗個 area 啦，個 area 啦，個 area 啦，
Mm-hmm.
係其實已經報道 okay that captures the essence of the child and the challenges that the child is going through and the challenges that the family is going through, and then it automatically just helps you to develop a treatment plan that captures the whole individual of that child, right?
Yes.
Um, because I think, and to speak to the word autism in the Somali community, I know there's a higher percentage of kiddos that are diagnosed with autism in their community, and I wonder a lot about cultural practices and how it might show up too, but and why they're diagnosed more than other communities. But I think for Bemong na may be yo hai ilo lo na ye ni capture that of bit lo chua more day. Sometimes it's like you said, Tia, sometimes it's better to just leave that word alone and just
Mhm.
use that word. I often think of words like apple, the fruit,
Mhm.
right? You hai yi lo lu, you ji lo lu che lo. Everybody uses apple. We all understand it, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, even the words like iPad. Guy, the oh, ni shiny lu, and the tamulisa, and you're like, oh, is it an iPhone? Is it an iPad? Is it right? And iPad today, we know, and we don't have
Mhm.
to use another word, right? And so I think that for me, and I don't particularly specialize in working with the autistic community. But for me, using that word and using that word with families who bring their child in who is living with autism, that seems to just again be easier for us, and then we can move
Yes.
on to the more important things, right?
Yes.
But in terms of symptoms, of course, we know that individuals with autism show developmental disabilities in two areas, and they have difficulties in two areas, which is the social communication and interactions,
Yes.
and then the restrictive repetitive behaviors or
Yes.
interests. Those are the two hallmark behavioral challenges. Certainly, there could be speech delays, which is one of the first thing that we think about with
Mhm.
young kiddos, right? Are they meeting their milestones developmentally speaking? If they're not speaking when they're supposed to, if they're not responding when they're supposed to, if they're not making eye contact as a baby, my baby played, what peekaboo, right?
Mhm.
And when we play peekaboo with the blankets, if they're not responding, their facial expressions are restricted, then we often wonder what's going on. And of course, we rule out all the other medical concerns first. Can they see? Can they hear?
Mhm.
Right. And once we rule all that out, then we go to are there any delays developmentally? And I know right now the word is neurodivergent. Are
Yes.
there any neurodivergent concerns with this individual? But bên mong này bên chỗ tiền nữ nữ gọi nữ nữ cái kia nữ chỉ qua li, right?
Mhm.
Nó
Mhm.
chỉ ya don't gọi nữ chỉ hai lúa cho nó yếu là chỉ đùa. The khó luôn
Mhm.
mà bé we use it not because we agree with it. We use it because it captures the way in which we describe it, and it's not necessarily a good word, and
Mhm.
yet we have to be real. That's what parents use, right?
Yes.
So, um,
We'll come back to that later
yeah.
on that word.
Okay. And so when our child is not developing as we would want them to, then we tend to go with the the delays of the cognition. And yet, the biggest piece is the social communication,
Yes.
the social interactions, and the repetitive play and the repetitive interest. And I think that's where cái mong chỉ cho tao tao nó phải có
Mhm.
tụi mình nữ chỉ bảo hai lưu đó là nữ tư chân jay nữ tư càng khó nó nữ tư càng khó tao because they have
Mhm.
these really focused interests. They know
Yes.
all the names of the presidents at age 3,
Yeah.
right? Then you're like, oh,
Yes.
J. So why
Mhm.
do you have concerns about my child?
Right.
And they mo ya nu lo ye ni yo bao ta ye ni ma li ho ba ni tu ken ni ma li ho behind ni lu because they we have more of a what's the word? I can't think of the word, but we believe that all things will happen if it's meant to happen.
Yes.
We're less of let's take control of the situation, let's intervene early, let's do this. We're more of leaving it to fate. Họ
Mhm.
bé mong yên chân hay tia, you đại đỡ yên lò li nó,
Yeah.
you trong mong yên lò li nó, do you đại đỡ lò tao pay ye, you tao pay, ta shi ma you chu tao, um, 我先得，我先了，我能用个里地，有特里到路能用铁。Right?
Mhm.
And so we have this acceptance of um, just things that happen to us. This is my fate. Therefore, I must accept it because bé cũng chẳng hạn bé thọ bé yêu là bé mới đại đời lọ. Thì bé lúc này
Mhm.
không là bé bé ngã đại đời đời đua lọ đại đời bóng mong mà chỉ tránh ta chỉ mà đại tớ khâu lá đại tớ thua lò gì, we just
Mm.
have to accept that. And for you young generations, you're like, no, you can change that. Don't just accept it, change it. But because that's sort of our mindset, when bé một chấm nhỏ lên nó gì, bé cụ chỉ chua ôn đầu ya bé cụ để ô nữ nhân lò lên nó gì bé chỗ lú nữa bé chỗ ba nữa lên nó gì giờ tụi mình nhỏ nữa more like you know, no more certain delays, but new, like I said in earlier, new bao all the president's names. Okay, Beku said that, oh no, Nuchitua, in jail.
Mhm.
Then we don't seek any services for it because we see the strengths which the child has, and we have hope that the child will lead a normal life. But what we know is that kids with autism, if they don't get the early intervention services,
Mhm.
they're going to struggle as they get older.
Yes.
They're going to struggle socially because having very restricted interests will make them look different.
Mhm.
And especially at the middle school age, no one wants to hang around with someone who doesn't have good social skills
Right.
and can be very smart, but is awkward socially. Then
Mhm.
they start to drop off the social scene. And then
Yeah.
as an adult, they're living a very isolated life,
Yes.
right? And we don't think about that, but that's what most autistic kids are facing. They can
Right.
be very highly intelligent because they're on the higher functioning level, but they're not going to be living a life that can be full if they don't
Yes.
have services in those areas, and especially those areas of social communication and interactions.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head on every level, and you're preaching to the choir right now. And I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Um, you know, I think a lot of it also goes to what does the Hmong people as a collective whole value? Yeah, we talk about the very few words that we have. And so, my husband's a little bit of a linguist, and he shared with me there's a small ethnic group in like the northern hemisphere where ice is very important to them. Like without ice, there's no survival, and so they have like maybe 5 to 10 terms just for
Mhm,
ice alone. So like you said, apple, so we just adopt apple. We all know.
mhm,
And so if you think about, it's just interesting. And of course, I'm sure you already know this, but it occurred to me, and it really was such a great example. He said, but did you ever consider that in the Hmong language, Jimo Ilalu to equate? No, there isn't. Right? Equate Dr. Alyssa, kappa nuna kappa conflict with her. You cannot just say the one word that equates no. It would be
mhm,
such a roundabout way of saying it. Oh, dear, that's not no, right? That's like a lot of words encompass an idea. So there isn't one word for no because in our Hmong community, we don't know how to say the word no, right? No, it's not important. We actually, we kind of stay away from saying no. Because we always say yes.
mhm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
And so, oh,
right.
yes. But
Or
there is,
y'all,
yeah, there isn't
it's
a word for,
version.
yes, there isn't a word for no. And so, there's so many things about our language that kind of guide us there. Um, and so, it's just so interesting when people ask me, well, can we come up with a word? I'm like, no, guys, let's just stick with autism. Yeah, go ahead. The ball, it's that buzzword. Okay. Now it's up to us to kind of guide the conversation to what does that mean? What does that look like? And you're right. A lot of families, they might think, he said the quirks. It is cute, right? Because you're like, oh, wow, he knows all the presidents. And they were reading at one. And then they're so smart. And yes, that all of that is true. But the social skill part is lacking. But why is that important? And so I always want to remind them, well, when they get to middle school age and all their peers' social skills have, elevated, when their peers are getting jobs and ready for the workforce and they can't carry on a two-turn conversation, that's when we talk about that bridging that gap with early intervention early on to kind of help reinforce and build those skills that they are going to develop a lot more slowly. And the social isolation is still real, but besides, yeah, in the Hmong community, we don't have a focus or even it's not important because we all are very socially isolated
Mm,
anyway. So it's so normal, yeah. You know, you know, morning you know, and it's just like the idea of having that community, it's okay. So then our individuals with autism, you know, they're going to inevitably be socially isolated, but it's so acceptable for that social isolation to happen anyway. So it's like, why do we need to worry about social isolation? It's not a concern, but it's like, it is because, and as you probably heard on some of the episodes, we talk about one day, right? I mean, you don't know. We don't know what's
mm,
gonna happen. Uh, who's gonna care for your child, love your child? How are they gonna do if they don't have those
mhm.
social skills to advocate for themselves, to share? You know what helps them to live that fulfilling life. You know, if we were kind of just okay with the social isolation all these years, it is very important, and so it all impacts every chapter of their life, you know, leading into old age. But I wonder if within the Hmong community, because there isn't such an emphasis or of importance on socialization, or yeah, you know, I think even my husband and I, we kind of joke that we're on an island of our own. You know, you know, around here, right? But we, you know, we don't. We're here kind of on an island, and that's so socially acceptable. And so, you know, I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think you bring up a great point, and I think that's why autism diagnosis gets missed in the Hmong community for higher functioning folks
Mm-hmm.
because in the collective community like the Hmong community, these social interactions look different.
Yes.
We don't engage in the etiquette of social interactions. It's I'm not saying how are you, you know, how's life with you? Oh, we don't sometimes we don't even talk.
Wow,
Like it's just random. I mean, you can come in and you don't even have to talk. You could just kind of sit with them and maybe do things with them. And because there's this unconditional love and acceptance, that
Mm-hmm.
there are no social expectations to engage in a pro-social manner,
Yes.
right? Unless you're just clearly non-social, clearly awkward,
Mm-hmm.
you kind of get missed, and there's no expectations of that. And
Mm-hmm.
even when some folks are a little bit awkward socially, it's just oh, ni ito halu cho chơi.
Mm-hmm.
Ito chỉ cho halu oh ni yin jong lin da.
Yes.
So it's an acceptance of that person. And so
Yeah.
within the collective community, there is no need to develop social skills because
Yeah.
you're unconditionally loved and accepted.
Yes.
Whereas now, they tell you know, community, we're all living apart. So when you're going to school, maybe your cousin doesn't want to hang out with you, you know, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not like in the Hmong way where we're cousins, we hang out. I mean, back in the days, that's what we did growing up. But now cousins don't hang out with each other. Now they're choosing to hang out with friends that they have more common interests with.
Mm-hmm.
You might have a cousin that you care for, but you're not choosing to hang out with them because they're socially awkward, right?
Right.
And back in the days, they think about this, you know, back in the days, they mona, socially awkward, na?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're showing signs of high functioning autism where they have they have interests that are very unusual. They don't know how to engage in that reciprocal social interaction. The she, guess what? Thầu cho chay vô bọn nè nó đi sport
Mm-hmm.
thằng luôn đó bây giờ lấy tới ô tụi nó chơi chơi sport thằng luôn đó thì đi sport được đâu do autism này ya
Yeah.
nó xí mà thầu cho chay mua nó nhau vậy là bài gì bọn nè đâu sự.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So you need to talungona
Yeah.
because most most of the time yeah that's in when you show the traits of autism. But yeah,
Okay.
studies have shown that it tends to be more males that are
Yeah.
diagnosed with that. And so the call of personal experience
Yeah, ma.
and
Mm-hmm.
so because it's a patriarchal culture, when a male cannot engage in the dating scene because they don't have these skills to do that, and they're also very fixed in their interest.
Mhm.
Thực chất yo pone ke le mo ji pone lo trâu se ke người tàu ilu nang tất
Mhm.
người tôi chỉ bảo nó tụi bọn hay lo ke là
Yeah.
tuần nang o ke su, and that's what I think has traditionally happened, and I think that the lower functioning autistic kids are the ones that get diagnosed and identified. And it's a lot easier to diagnose them and identify them because not only do they have struggles in the social communication interaction area and also the repetitive behaviors or interests, but they also have deficits in the language, in the cognitive, and in their overall mannerisms where they're probably like flapping
Yes.
their hands, and they obviously look very, very delayed.
Mhm.
And so those are the ones that I think tend to be more identified and getting services earlier on than the higher functioning ones.
Yes, for sure. I was born in a refugee camp, right? So I don't know what life was like in Laos and what the conversations at the time, pre 80s was like. But I would say, yeah, you know, now regardless of how aware or not aware they are of mental disabilities, developmental intellectual disabilities, sometimes they go ahead there, "Yo, but they can't be they not be
Mm,
and
mhm,
as a young child, you would be like, "Oh my gosh, it must be the United States," yeah, especially when they talk about like things like diagnosis like cancer. But they being they care more cancer. I thought they can make that I don't know called the night big shut them, we go more cancer, and it's like, well, you think about that. And then, for me coming into the field, I go, that can't be accurate. That cannot it can't be that, oh, once the Hmong, came to America, then all of these diagnoses just popped up out of nowhere. So I do feel like it's a overgeneralized misunderstanding of disability, and
mhm,
so it's just that overgeneralized term too. Dua, it's just and on my podcast, I that's the one soapbox I will stand on at all times and just say, can we move away from that and find a different term, or just not use that term for disability? Because I think when you for parents, young ones, even mid-age, older ones, when you because we talk about labeling, y'all. We when others and yourself label you, this is daughter, it does something. You kind of maybe it sets different expectations, and like you said, um, all the hopes and dreams that you had, they kind of diminished a little bit because you put that word because you bought the they constitute a certain understanding. Everybody understands what it means, but it's like, but then it's hard because with autism, no, they're so smart. He can do a
mhm,
100-piece puzzle at 3,
yeah,
at 2. They can tell you all the presidents. They can tell you all these things. So it's not the correct terminology, and so I will always die on that mountain by myself. But yeah, can you speak to, when you're having like oh, we never seen this
mm,
before. Must be a new
mhm,
condition, a new diagnosis. I don't know what happened. And it's like, no, I think it existed. We just didn't have a term for it, right? We go back to terminology again. Chimo, that understanding, chimo, awareness, chimo, education, someone from the city to come up and say, hey guys, it's okay. Hey, there's a term,
mhm,
there's a
mhm,
thing,
mhm.
but I'm grateful that we are advanced enough now to acknowledge that and like an early intervention. But yeah, can you shed some light on that?
Well, I mean, that is a really important thing to cover, right? Because we don't want to send the message that our culture was free of symptoms
Yeah.
and free of conditions. It's how we have conceptualized these symptoms
Yes.
and how we have addressed or not addressed these symptoms
Correct.
that has masked the conditions. So,
Absolutely.
what I mean by that is that our collective practices of Shipa, Shihlu, Our
Mhm.
collective practices have often masked the nuanced challenges of the individuals because we're not an individualized society. So yakamo ituminyo want to show some of these symptoms that are not in the severe range, but in the
Mhm.
moderate to the mild range, then as a collective, bé tự wo they hold it that on nè. Bé tự
Mhm.
mo wo ta bé tự ba ta là nè bây giờ. And so going back to what we said earlier, you know, there's the unconditional acceptance that you don't have to talk. Có chỉ
Mhm.
bảo là có thứ ya ý từ một tây rong tơ mà bây giờ có thứ
Yama.
rong tơ thế có thứ chỉ là bây giờ lấy bố mỏ có nó bây giờ lấy khi có mồ hôi na nó the stuff gì chỗ có chỉ hay lừa mẹ hay có chỉ bảo hay lừa gì we kind of mask that we do everything for you, you know.
Mhm.
You come in and you don't have to speak and there's no expectations, and therefore it doesn't get identified. Um, and you know, then the ones that are more on the more severe end of the spectrum, right? They're fully cared for by the collective,
Mhm.
and so they're either sheltered, coddled, or ostracized. And so
Right.
so you never know that that other family has someone that's struggling with more severe autistic symptoms.
Mhm.
And then when they come out, it's like, "Oh, 他们是打赌打赌打." And so
Mm.
they unfortunately, they get, ostracized in that way, and no one really knows about them, and as a kid, you kind of vaguely remember that family
Yama.
member, but they weren't really part of the family, and so
Mhm.
you know, then so you're just not your radar is just not high up on in terms of the percentages, right? And you and I are both not researchers, so a lot of this is anecdotal
Yes.
information, but that's where it has to start because
Right.
we have both, you know, agreed that this is more seminal than anything
Yeah.
because we talk about it, uh, and yet we don't have the data, but we have the human experience, the life
Mhm.
experience to say we know of people that are delayed, whether they're autistic or not. We don't know because so yeah,
Mhm.
and yet they may be on the autism spectrum, but the collective practices have either sheltered them or masked those delays, those struggles to where they seem to be doing well, they seem to be functional in the community. And part of it is because we don't prioritize social skills as
Right.
much in our home community. If they don't want to talk, it's okay
Mhm.
as long as love, you know,
Mhm. Mhm.
even if they don't have language, I don't know if that's as big of a concern in our community, as
Right.
long as they can understand what is expected of them, as long as they can fulfill the roles that we
Mhm.
ask of them. And even if they can fulfill it, not 100% well, as long as they can fulfill it well enough,
Mhm.
then kind of let it be. So I think that's why 被摸的被去摸，丁宁摸 the mauling though, because
Mm.
they get hidden in all of these pockets
Right.
of the collective practices.
Yes, that's such a great perspective. I never considered it that way. And thank you so much for pointing out too that we're not researchers, but I hope that anyone who's listening today, maybe you or your child, we see a lot of siblings, who are inspired. Hey, your mama, you guys want to go and become a researcher? We hope this
Yes,
propels you there. We,
right.
encourage you. Dr. Listen, I was just talking about I'm in my 40s and I'm pretty settled with, where I want to continue the rest of my career. But I think we need the data, and I'm excited for the future. I'm here to uplift the future Hmong researchers who will give us the data to say, hey, here is where we're at. Here's the baseline, right? But I'm just so
Mhm.
happy to get this conversation started. That's been the whole point of this podcast is normalizing these conversations. And today, to hear có hai cháu lùm mong good dog thả rong good dog good nhà thảo good your paw good your thả, and that's partially too why I invited you on the show is that I know a lot of people who listen are probably 20-30 range, but yung mo cho lo mình chỉ lời trên chơi nó ít cho lùm mong from it to appear, someone that hai lù lời lời to to lời nói chỉ lời they feel like they're at a mong outing y'all. You mua cho mong outing you bỏ you nói tan thôi cho bắt nhiều chứ thật chứ it's so comforting even though it's overwhelming. It's just so comforting because that's what you grew up with, and so thank you for bringing your voice and your experience and insight to my little podcast here. Is I've learned so much today, and you've given me so much food for thought and so much of your experience. And thank you so much for what you've contributed to the Hmong community up there in the Twin Cities. And I just am excited to see where this goes, and I'm excited to have you as an ally, as a partner in this conversation. It was a little uh, nerve-wracking to see if the Hmong community was ready for this conversation, and to have
Mhm.
all of you guys just really support it and be so encouraging. It has done amazing things for me. So, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Dia, for this opportunity to engage around this really important conversation with autism and with developmental delays, and with just shedding a light on the importance of being open for uh, prevention or early intervention,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I think that's what you're really trying to
Yes.
do here is not only raising awareness, but that this raising of awareness will open that door to those early interventions so
Yes.
that the trajectory of a child who shows these symptoms will
Mm-hmm.
get the resources and the service early enough so that they
Yes.
don't have to suffer or struggle
Mm-hmm.
as a teen, as a young adult when 我哋俾我係同到你嚕嚕得啦是你嚕時啊，帶走你包打啦. We don't want
Mm-hmm.
to get to that stage. We want them to get that early intervention services so that they can live a life that is interactive and engaging and full to their abilities. So thank you for this opportunity to have this conversation. Thank you for the work that you do, the passion that you pour into it. I can see that you are very passionate about this, and it has been my pleasure to have this conversation with you. So
Thank you so much. I look forward to working with you in the future and continuing to bring tough conversations like this. I think that it is time to have them and to let the
yeah,
families out there know that you're not alone and there are individuals out there willing to help you get these conversations started. So, Ochel, thank you so much.
thank you.